Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call the Council and Committee meeting to order. I'm Mike Startuk, the Acting Mayor. First on the delegation list is Iran and Simca, Iran Armatullah and Simca Marshall from the Douglas Students' Union. If you could come up to the microphone.
Sweet. Does work? Yeah. Good to go. All right, awesome. Hi. So thanks. We're honored here for the opportunity to present to the Surrey City Council on our provincial Don't Close the Doors campaign to save adult basic education. My name is Aaron Armutlu from the Douglas Students' Union.
And my name is Simca Marshall from the BC Federation of Students. Okay, so as Aaron mentioned, we're here to present on our Don't Close the Doors campaign, which is a campaign that we launched in response to some changes made to adult basic education or high school upgrading courses. So just to provide Council with a bit of context for what adult basic education is, we can break down ABE students into three categories of students. So the first one is for those who are looking to obtain their high school diploma. The second is for those who are looking to simply upgrade their high school courses. So maybe they need to upgrade their sciences to get into something like nursing or engineering. And then the last is for those who are looking to simply improve their basic literacy or numeracy skills. And so ABE is a really important feeder program because it helps students continue on into post-secondary programming and also helps them enter or stay in the job market.
Who are adult basic education students? These students are from some of our most marginalized groups in our society. So 18% are Indigenous students who are overrepresented in these programs. Some are youth aging or have aged out of care trying to access post-secondary education. 70% of students in ABE desire to or plan to continue further into other post-secondary education, many of which go on into nursing and other trades which are critical in creating more laborers to fill the skill shortages that the province of BC will face. 10 to 15% of Douglas College students have taken some form of adult basic education. So in one of my classes of about 30 people, 3 to 5 of those students may not have been in those seats without access to ABE. Since fees were implemented at Douglas College, which are the equivalent of first-year college and university transfer courses, official enrollment has dropped by 30%, and instructors have indicated that about half of their students have returned. So we as a society agree that high school is free basic education, and high school education should be free regardless of your age and economic status.
So to talk about what actually happened to ABE, so in December 2014, the provincial government announced a $6.9 million funding cut to adult basic education programming. At the same time, they also announced the reversal of a tuition fee-free policy that was put in place by the Gordon Campbell government in 2007. And that was put in place by the government after months of consultation with the public and after the release of a report that showed how important having this basic education remain accessible for adults was, because it not only strengthens society but also the economy. This funding cut came as quite a shock, not just to students, but to the institutions as well, because the institutions were left scrambling, trying to figure out what they were going to do to continue offering this programming that they have seen themselves how important it is and how it can really change a person's life, where they're able to kind of have a new, fresh start, going back to school and obtaining their diploma or upgrading their courses and getting into another program. Almost all institutions that offer ABE are now charging tuition fees on adult basic education programming across the province. And since the tuition fees have been put in place, we're actually seeing enrollment drops. Some are pretty dramatic. Some are around 20-30%, as far as up to 60% on some campuses. Here in Surrey at KPU at Kwantlen, enrollment has dropped by around 20%, and students are being charged about $118 per week for high school programming, and international students that need to access that programming as well are being charged $561. So just to talk a bit about the campaign itself. So students in BC created a campaign called Don't Close the Doors, and this was our response to all the things that have been happening to ABE programming. We launched it in April 2015. And since we launched it, we've seen a ton of momentum from with our own members and students on campuses, but also members of the public. But when the funding cuts were announced to ABE, we actually had a number of former ABE students contacting us, sending us emails, and talking about how important ABE was to them and how it really helped change their lives and help them get kind of like a fresh start. So the campaign has one simple ask, and that is to restore the funding that was removed from adult basic education and to reverse the removal of the tuition fee-free mandate.
Yeah. So specifically at Douglas, at our postcard drive in the fall, in 1 week in November, we received over 1,500 signatures from students, staff, and faculty. So there's broad support for adult basic education and for it to be tuition-free and accessible. The BC Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services, a bipartisan government committee, has recommended in their report on the 2016 and 2017 budget consultations to reinstate tuition-free English as a Second Language, ESL, adult basic education, ABE, and adult special education programs, and provide stable and predictable multi-year funding for coordinated community literacy programs and services.
So students' unions across the province have been approaching city councils to endorse our campaign. So far we have 22 municipalities that have endorsed the campaign and have taken leadership by taking a strong stand to defend adult basic education. So on the island, Courtenay, Port Alberni, Parksville, Cumberland, Ladysmith, Powell River, Qualicum Beach, Duncan, and Victoria have endorsed the campaign. Up north, we have the communities of Prince Rupert, Terrace, Smithers, Hazelton, and just this past week, Quesnel actually endorsed the campaign and will be presenting to Prince George on Monday. In the interior and Kootenays, Nelson, Trail, and Castlegar have endorsed the campaign. And here in the Lower Mainland, Burnaby, New West, Port Moody, and Richmond have formally endorsed the campaign, and the City of Vancouver also announced Adult Basic Education Day on September 12th as a result of our campaign work. So there's been a ton of momentum with this campaign, as I mentioned, and it's been really encouraging to us as students to see City Councillors show such a strong display of leadership for something that greatly affects their constituents.
Yeah. So the ask, we submitted a sample motion to the board before today, and I'll read it as follows. Be it resolved that the BC Federation of Students campaign to save adult basic education Don't Close the Doors be endorsed, and be it further resolved that a letter to Minister Andrew Wilkinson and Minister Mike Bernier stating support for adult basic education and requesting the ministry to reinstate funding for adult basic education programs and tuition fees be abolished on the programs. And be it further resolved that the letter be copied to the BC Federation of Students and the Douglas Students Union. And yeah, that wrapped it up. And if you have any questions, you can ask.
Are there, Councillor Hain.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It was very well put together. I'm curious, particularly given the budget shortfall and the budget strain, if you will, placed on the K-12 school system, particularly here in Surrey, with the recent Supreme Court decision to restore class size and composition, and the pressure that that's going to put on. I'm curious where you see that priority vis-a-vis particularly international students, and you would want the provincial government to fund international students for high school upgrading, given the pressures on our K-12 system that we're experiencing currently for local students to get through high school.
I'm sorry, can I just clarify? Are you asking whether or not we would be advocating for ABE to be free for international students as well?
Yes, because I heard you include them, so I'm curious if that is part of your ask.
Our ask is mainly focused on adult basic education and being offered for free for all adults who need it. And the reason why I mentioned the cost of it for international students is because oftentimes international students really show the disparity for how much international students are being charged compared to domestic students. But like we mentioned in our presentation, adult basic education serves a lot of not just international students, but also like new immigrants and people who are new Canadians to the society. So we really believe that it's important to have a basic level of education available to all adults who need it.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments? I have a question. You had made a comment about the enrollment has dropped by 20% within the KPU system that's here. What does that represent in numbers of students, and are those students from our city?
I don't have the exact numbers offhand for beyond the percentage, but I can certainly send that along to council. I'm not totally sure how many of those students would be residing in Surrey, but I do know that a lot of students opt to live closer to campus so that they don't have to transit too far. So I believe it would be affecting a large number of residents, as well as students who are, living in Surrey and maybe commuting out to places like Douglas.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. It's given us all some insight to that adult basic education and the upgrades that we're seeing now as opposed to years ago where it was completely opposite of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second delegation is Sheldon Tetro with the Surrey Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee. Sheldon.
Good evening. Again, my name is Sheldon Tetro. I'm a Métis consultant. And for the last year, I've been working with the Surrey Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee on developing a social innovation strategy. So tonight I'm going to share with you the work that we've done over the last year, as well as talk a little bit about the path forward. And before I do that, I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Coast Salish First Nations. Here in Surrey, it includes the Semiahmoo First Nation, the Kwantlen First Nation, the Katzie First Nation, the Coquitlam First Nation, the Kakate First Nation, and the Tsawwassen First Nation. And I think you have a wonderful blessing almost to have such amazing and diverse and vibrant Coast Salish First Nation communities here in Surrey. So, before I go too far, also I wanted to just recognize who the Surrey Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee is. So we are a group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations that have come together to advocate on behalf of the Surrey Urban Indigenous community. So here with me tonight, we have some members of the Leadership Committee. Of course, Councillor LaFranc is the chair of the committee. But here we also have, and maybe you guys could stand so people could see you. So Tom Ullman is with Quingetel. I think many of you know Tom. He's a long-standing advocate for urban Indigenous people here in Surrey. Kendra Newman is with Access. Beside her is Keenan McCarthy, who's with Nova Métis Heritage Association. And then Mandy Sandhar and Karen Blackman are here with the MCFD. So these are just some of the people who are on our committee. Some of the other people are in these photos that you can see on this slide. And we've been working very hard over the last year to organize ourselves to be better advocates for the urban Indigenous population. This photo actually, interestingly, was taken out at Beecher Place. So we enjoyed out South Surrey one day doing our work. So the Social Innovation Project has two phases. And the first phase was completed last year. You may remember I came to Council about a year ago and presented the All Our Relations report, which was phase one. All Our Relations was really our attempt to describe the urban Indigenous community in Surrey, largely because the community for most people is quite invisible. So we wanted to describe what the community was like. So I'll just go over very briefly a few of the key points. First of all, there's 16,000 Indigenous people living in Surrey. which makes it the largest urban Indigenous population in Metro Vancouver. Again, that's not often recognized, but it's a fact. The second key finding was that the growth rate of the population is very significant. Within 15 years, the Indigenous population in Surrey is expected to reach 48,000 people. And so that's a huge number. And finally, the Indigenous population here in Surrey is very young. The demographic consists largely of children and young families. So, of course, that bucks the national trend, which is going the opposite direction. The Indigenous population here in Surrey is very young. All of these things have very significant implications for programs, for policy, and for funding of to Indigenous people here in Surrey. There's a couple other findings that I just want to point out as well, which also have significant implications. The first is that 45% of Indigenous children in Surrey live in poverty. We believe that this is the highest child poverty rate of any major urban municipality in Canada. The next statistic is that 60% of the children in care in Surrey are Indigenous, which is completely out of whack when you consider the fact that Indigenous people in Surrey make up only 3% of the total population. So in our view, these statistics point to our collective failure to be able to provide a foundation upon which the next generation can grow and have success. Now, I don't want to paint all the community with the same brush, so I want to show you one other statistic, which is this, that 45% of Indigenous households in Surrey own their own home. This is very significant. It's a very good statistic. It's almost double what home ownership levels are in Vancouver. And it just goes to show you that as we look at these statistics, we have to be careful to observe that there are, in fact, large segments of the community that are doing quite well on their own. They own their own home, they have jobs or are going to school and are raising their families. For other segments of the community, however, like the 45% of Indigenous children in Surrey living in poverty, they need extra supports and additional help to ensure that they can have a future that they deserve. So that brings us to phase 2 of the Social Innovation Project, which has been all about solutions that are driven by the Indigenous community and solutions that we hope to implement in the years ahead. So the first thing we did was we started with a vision of what we wanted to achieve. Our vision is a city that values Indigenous contributions to city life, a city that is committed to working towards reconciliation at all levels, a city where every Indigenous person has the opportunity to achieve their full potential. Obviously, as the Surrey Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee, we also had to ask ourselves what our role in bringing that vision to life would be. And so we developed a commitment to this mission statement, which is our mission is to be the collective voice of the urban Indigenous population in Surrey. We will advocate on behalf of all urban Indigenous people in Surrey and work collaboratively with other governments, organizations, and individuals that are committed to understanding and achieving our vision. Based on the vision that we developed and our mission, we then went forward and developed 5 key strategic objectives. These are all in the report, obviously, that's in front of you. The first strategic objective is to create and strengthen partnerships that will benefit urban Indigenous people. The second is to expand the urban Indigenous leadership capacity in Surrey. The third is to improve and grow programs and services for urban Indigenous people. The fourth is to increase education and understanding about the urban Indigenous community in Surrey. And the fifth is to increase funding for urban Indigenous programs and services. So for each of these strategic objectives, what we've done is we have described the reason or the rationale for why they're important. We've developed goals for each one of these objectives and strategies to achieve the goals. And then we've described what success is like. And so you'll find all of that in the report. In total, there's 5 strategic objectives, 42 goals, and 100 strategies, which is a lot of work to do. We know it's a lot of work, but we also feel very good about the work that we've done to this date, about the strategy that's in front of you. We felt like we've built up some momentum over the past year, and we're starting to see ways that we can advance our priorities in the near future. So getting here, we've benefited greatly from the in-kind contributions of the city, including staff time and, of course, Councillor Frank's leadership at the committee level. We've also benefited from federal funding to do the work. And of course, all of the organizations that I mentioned and who were part of our work contributed their own time and their own energy to make this a success. We are now actively seeking funding from the federal government, from the provincial government, as well as community foundations to see about how we can work to implement all of our strategic objectives. And we're also looking to work with others who are ready to support our vision. So we know we can't do this alone. It's a lot of work. In our view, the social innovation strategy is an invitation to others to work with us, to partner with us, and to move forward collectively. So on that note, we're here tonight to ask for Council's continued support to be an ally to the Surrey Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee, to work with us to implement the strategic objectives, and to continue to be an ally to the Indigenous community that lives here in Surrey. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Sheldon. Councillor Frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Sheldon. Thank you for that presentation. I have to say that it's been such a privilege to work with both you and the Leadership Committee entirely over the past 2 years. It's been a real privilege and a learning experience for me. And in the spirit of reconciliation and moving forward in a good way, I hope that we are able to implement many of the strategies that we've identified or that the Urban Indigenous Committee has identified as they're really important to meeting the needs of our community. And I also want to thank all of the Indigenous Leadership Committee who comes out so often to these events, and I see you in the seats, and I also acknowledge the staff, Aileen and Kristen and Ashley, as they've done so much work. And it's been a privilege to work with you, Sheldon. So I want to thank you all and know that we'll be moving forward in a good way. So whatever support I can continue to give. Thank you.
Mayor Hepner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Sheldon, for the presentation today on the Phase 2 of the Urban Indigenous Leadership Committee and the significant work that each of the organizations have put into bringing the strategy to us today. What will happen now is we'll take a look at the strategy in more in depth with respect to our staff and the things that are actually applicable directly to the city, as you've described them in here, or as the committee has described them in here. We'll be able to take a look at how can we make that happen, or what it would take to make that happen, and then move forward with respect to the strategy in its total. Because I see there are many things that involve not only the organizations that participated so wholeheartedly in establishing the strategy, but other levels of government, not just the city. And we'll take a very serious look, because it's a significant portion of our population, and when you see the numbers that 45% of them are in poverty, then clearly some of the programs that we need to put in place will take a very careful look at how we can advance this strategy in the very best way possible. So thank you for your presentation, but more importantly, thank you to the work of the organizations that put it together for us today.
And to wrap that up, I also agree. I think the work that you guys have done, you've put it into simple math for me. The numbers are the numbers, and you can see the pitfalls and the successes that are there, and the pathway that it's going to take to get to the resolution that's there. So thank you to you and the committee that's there.
Thank you.